All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Roxanne Perdue. I'm a consultant with the Professional Services Division at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. If you are in the session for edTPA 101, then you are in the correct place. And so we are very fortunate today to have with us two experts, but we'll start with our presenter, Lori Kroger. Dr. Lori Kroger is a senior educational consultant with the Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. Lori has been part of the edTPA community as a faculty member, edTPA coordinator, and assistant dean since 2013. In this role, Lori provides direct support to programs in states across the country, including California. Lori will be providing us today with an introduction to edTPA, including an overview of the requirements and supports that are available to candidates and programs. Lori?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Roxanne. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today. I am on the East Coast, actually, so it's chilly over here. I wish I was out in California with everyone, but it certainly is nice to meet all of you, at least virtually. I recognize some of the names of folks who are joining our session from our California edTPA coordinator calls, so it's certainly nice to have some of you with us as well. Before I get started, I'd like to ask Kendall Stansberry. Kendall is with Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity. So she's with SCALE. And so Kendall, I'll let you say a few words.
Hi, I'm Kendall Stansberry. I want to welcome you to this session. And what SCALE does, SCALE's part in this assessment is we were the assessment developers and have the intellectual property to it. So we answer, well, everybody answers substantive questions, but, and I'll be answering questions in the chat if Lori doesn't have a chance. I'm also going to turn off my video. I apologize, but I can't type unless the computer's in a different position. So you don't want to see just the top of my head.
Oh, Lori, before you begin, I forgot to say this session is being recorded. So for anyone who would like to go back and review, you will be able to do so as we give out the recording links. Also, Lori will be doing a question and answer at the end, the last 10 minutes. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and she can get to them at the end if it's not answered to you during the meeting. Lori?
Great. Thank you, Roxanne. Yeah, so just a couple kind of quick, or one really just quick housekeeping note. Definitely use the chat feature right down there in the bottom. Probably the bottom, might be at the top of your Zoom control panel. Feel free to click chat and type in your question. Because Kendall is with us today, Kendall will be able to answer some of those questions as well. And certainly any that we don't get to in the chat, we'll use those last several minutes of the time we have together today to answer those questions. And so I promise between Kendall and myself, we should be able to answer most of the questions for you. So just a couple other quick reminders or notes, and that's that, and Kendall had indicated this earlier, that edTPA was authored by the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity, or SCALE, with editorial and design assistance from Evaluation Systems. edTPA is a trademark of Stanford or its affiliates, and the use, reproduction, copying, or redistribution of trademarks without written permission of Stanford or its affiliates is prohibited. So just a little legalese to take care of before we get started. During our time together today, these are kind of the 5 highlights or the 5 points that I want to cover, hoping that this gives you sort of a nice overview of edTPA. So we'll talk a little bit about just the assessment itself and kind of getting to know what the requirements are. We'll talk a little bit about scoring and score reports. We'll also talk about joining the edTPA community and how your program can do that. We'll talk briefly about the role of the edTPA coordinator or contact person. That's really the role that will serve. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then also how to locate and access key resources and supports. I know that as programs who are mentoring new teachers through their edTPA, those are really important for you to have. So want to make sure that I tell you about how to get to those as well. So before we get started, you've heard us use the acronym of SCALE. We've talked about evaluation systems. So I just want to kind of explain this relationship and sort of who's involved in edTPA. And this will also come, we'll talk more about this in a little bit when I talk about joining the community. So as Kendall said, the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity were the developers of edTPA. They hold the intellectual property rights for edTPA and are responsible for all the material development and scorer benchmarking. So Stanford still plays a very active role in this. You can see Kendall being here with us today. AACTE, or the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. This is an organization that is an umbrella of organizations or colleges of teacher education across the United States. AACTE serves in this partnership as well as the communications partner. They do a couple things. They host the faculty, the program, the instructor, the mentor website, not the site for candidates. I'm going to talk about these two sites later this afternoon, but definitely the AACTE hosts the site that is really for programs and for those of us who are supporting candidates. So that's one thing that they do. The other thing that AACTE helps out with is by maintaining the membership directory. And so what they do is if a program is going to be supporting candidates with edTPA, they can join the edTPA community, and they do that through AACTE. You may, if you're familiar with AACTE, there is a component of joining AACTE that is at a cost. However, joining the component of AACTE that houses just the edTPA resources has no cost associated with it. So again, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but just wanted you to be familiar with those acronyms. And then, of course, the Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson, we are the organization that makes edTPA operational across the United States. So the three organizations, we work in tandem. We meet very often. We have conversations. We collaborate together frequently. So again, we have Kendall from SCALE with us today, and then myself, and I'm with the Evaluation Systems Group. So I mentioned that AACTE houses the resource library, or all the materials that are designed for programs. So again, not for candidates, but for programs. And the presentation that I have for you today is based off of one of those resources. It is, we call it the implementation guide. So it's actually titled Effectively Implementing edTPA for Educator Preparation Programs. I know as induction programs, you are not the primary program. You're not the educator preparation program for your candidates. However, the resource does still apply. There's still a lot of information in it that does apply. So I'm going to kind of base what I share with you today sort of loosely off of this, this resource. So I want to start with kind of getting to know the assessment and helping you understand a little bit about the structure of edTPA and some of the requirements. So edTPA was designed as part of a multiple measures assessment system. So as one component of ways that programs can evaluate teacher candidate readiness to teach. And so you can see in here, I've listed sort of all the other ways that programs, both primary programs and induction programs, use really to assess candidate readiness. So things like assessments and coursework that's completed as part of a primary program. Basic skills and subject matter tests are part of this system. The professional development that they receive from your programs, right, from the induction programs. And then observation, evaluations, and feedback from both time when they were in the classroom during their primary program, but also those observations and feedback that they're receiving during their induction program. And so all of that is really designed to help inform a program, to inform about a candidate's readiness to teach. And edTPA sits as the capstone to that. So it comes at the end. And you can see here, and again, I'm going to talk more about this in just a few minutes, but it really is the integration of planning, instruction, and assessment, and then also including an analysis of teaching and a focus on academic language. Again, I'll kind of break a little bit of this apart for you in just a little while. The other thing that I want to make sure I tell you, and I know there's a lot of words on this screen. I will tell you how to get here for sure. But there are right now 28 subject-specific areas for edTPA. So edTPA is a subject-specific field. So each field has its own handbook. A couple to note just for California. This is the list for California. So what you see here is specific to your state. Where you can find this, you can find this if you go to edTPA.com, so edTPA.com, and then click on the About tab. Once you're at the About tab, there's a drop-down menu, and if you select California, this will populate for you. So a couple things to just note here. If the candidate is earning their credential in multiple subject elementary, they have two handbooks that they will select from, either the Elementary Education Literacy with Mathematics Task 4, or the opposite of that, which is Elementary Education Mathematics with Literacy Task 4. So what this is that first part, if we just use the literacy with mathematics as task 4, the first 3 tasks, planning, instruction, and assessment, are all on literacy. And the 4th task is a task that is focused just on mathematics. So that's for the multiple subject elementary. The single subject secondary handbooks, you can see them kind of listed here. Agriculture is agricultural education, art is visual arts, but there are a few that I just want to kind of point out to you. So things like secondary science. Secondary science would include biological sciences, general science, geosciences. I'm just looking to see any other ones. Physics, biological science, chemistry. So all of those kind of fold under the secondary science handbook. Very similar with mathematics, geometry, physics, geometry, calculus, general mathematics, all of that would be under secondary mathematics. So some of them are collapsed. 2 other ones just to note, one other one to note is world languages, and that's all of the world languages. So again, you can kind of see this right here. edTPA.com, and then click the About tab, and the drop-down menu, you can select California, and that's how you'll find this. Roxanne, I saw that a couple questions have come in already. Anything that we should try to stop and answer real quick? Or Kendall, I don't know if you have a chance to look at that.
Will the PowerPoint be available?
Yes, I will put it in the resources, yes. Okay, great. Thanks, Kendall. I see you answered a couple other questions in there. Thank you. All right, so what I want to do now is really kind of unpack the structure of edTPA for you so that you can understand a little bit about what just the organization of the assessment. So edTPA is divided or developed into 3 tasks: planning, instruction, and assessment. So task 1, the planning task, is the intended teaching. This is the task where candidates are asked to provide evidence and a reflection of their planning for content understandings, how they're planning to support varied student learner needs, how they use knowledge of their students when planning, and then how they're selecting or designing assessments to monitor student learning. So that's all in that planning task. Task 2, which is the instruction task, is their enacted teaching. So in this task, candidates are providing video evidence and reflection on the learning environment, the ways in which they have engaged their students in learning, how they use questioning to deepen student learning, and their subject-specific pedagogical strategies that they've used when delivering instruction. That third task, the assessment task, is where candidates are asked to provide evidence and an analysis of student learning. So they provide evidence of the feedback that they've given to their students, ways in which they've provided opportunities for their students to understand that feedback, to use that feedback. So that's really what they're providing in task 3. And then woven throughout the assessment, you can see kind of on the outside of these circles connecting them, are 2 additional constructs, academic language, and then the constructs that are associated with teaching effectiveness. So academic language, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in just on the next couple slides as well. But what I really want you to take away from this right now is that academic language is more than just the needs that are associated with English language learners. It also includes students, the needs of students who are speaking a variety of English dialects. And then also students who didn't grow up in a community where they were exposed to the vocabulary or the language that is used in schools or used in the disciplines. So all of those really combine to for a candidate to be thinking about the academic language needs of their students. The components of teaching effectiveness, so you can see those kind of on the inside of that, that circle, include justifying their planning decisions, analyzing their teaching, and then using data to inform instruction. So again, those constructs are embedded really throughout edTPA, and we see them in all 3 tasks. So I do want to talk just a little bit more about academic language. This tends to be one area that folks have questions about. So I'll just kind of address, what does academic language look like in edTPA? And so for here, edTPA looks at 4 demands of language use. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these just very quickly, but it's really the language, academic language is the language that students need to learn and use to engage in meaningful ways in what they're being taught, right, in the curriculum and in the content. It includes both oral and written language, and it really is the means by which students develop and express their content understandings. So the 4 academic language demands that are included or assessed in edTPA are language function, vocabulary, syntax, and discourse. So I'll just quickly define each of these for us real quick. So language function, it is the purpose of the language that's being used in the classroom, right? So it's why are we using language? What are we learning from that language? So language functions are most often the strong active verbs in a well-written learning outcome. So these might be words like, a language function might be to describe or explain, evaluate, compare and contrast. All of those things that we're asking students to do and that require something very specific, right? If I'm being asked to compare and contrast, I need to know that that means I have to list the similarities and the differences. If I'm being asked to describe something, I need to know that I have to include details about that. So the language function, again, most often those strong active verbs and really well-written learning outcomes. Vocabulary is exactly what it sounds like. So vocabulary is both the language of the discipline, right? Thinking that a table means something different in math than it might mean if I'm reading a story. Those could mean different things. It's also, though, the vocabulary of school, right? So what does it mean to define? What does that word mean? What does explain mean? And so it can be the language of school as well. Syntax, that's the third one, is the set of rules or conventions for making meaning. So if we're talking about something that's written, this might be the order of words in a sentence. In math, it might be the order of the symbols and numbers. So if I say 3 plus 1 equals 4, that makes sense. You know what I mean. It has the correct syntax and the correct meaning. But if I say 3, 4 plus equal 1, it doesn't make any sense, right? The syntax isn't correct. So it doesn't have meaning. In music, the notes on the stipulets, I apologize, I am not musically inclined, cannot read sheet music at all. My older daughters can. And so they can look at sheet music and it has meaning, right? It's a language, and the order and the placement of those notes on the staff mean something to them. And if they're not in the correct order, it loses its meaning, or it has an entirely different meaning. So again, that's syntax. And then discourse is the ways in which members of a discipline communicate with each other, how they share knowledge with each other. So in something like English language arts, this might be a 5-paragraph essay, right? That's an entirely appropriate way to summarize something in English language arts. In history, students might engage in a debate. In a secondary science class, they might be creating a lab report. If I turned in a lab report format for my book report that I read, probably not going to suffice, right? So the different ways that members of a discipline communicate. So knowing that academic language can be sometimes tricky for candidates and thinking that through, I do want to just talk to you kind of about the resources that are available, but then also what the requirements are. So for task 1, candidates are asked to have evidence of intentional strategies and tools that allow students to meet the language demands. So they're really thinking about, how will I support my students as they're using language? In task 2, candidates are asked to analyze their own teaching effectiveness. So now they've delivered that instruction and they're asked to propose improvements to their instruction. And this might be an area where they do that. And then in task 3, the candidate provides an analysis of the student's language use, really reflecting on how that language use informs that student's understanding of the content and of their learning. So we do have academic language handouts. Scale has developed those for most content areas. So I put on here, just as a quick reminder, not for early childhood education, classical languages or world languages. And there's a simple reason for that. Early childhood education, the focus of academic language is entirely on vocabulary. And so at the current time, there is not an academic language handout for early childhood. Classical and world languages actually do not even have an overt analysis or an overt evaluation of academic language. So those 2 rubrics that evaluate academic language are actually missing from the Classical and World Languages Handbook. And that's very intentional, because if you think about it, if I'm teaching a foreign language or a second or subsequent language to someone, everything I'm teaching is academic language, right? I'm teaching the discourse and the syntax. I'm teaching the language function. I'm teaching vocabulary. And so that actual academic language is embedded throughout everything that the candidate is teaching. And so there isn't that overt or additional evaluation of academic language in those 2 handbooks. But for every other content area, there is a discipline-specific academic language handout. I really cannot talk about these enough. They're amazing resources, because what they do is break down academic language for that particular content area. So kind of gives an overview of what academic language is, but then also provides some discipline-specific examples. So I would highly recommend these. And they're available in the resource library on edtpa.aacte.org. And again, you'll have this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to click the link. You'll be able to get there. Just I put on here as a reminder, and I'm going to talk about this later, but that access to the resource library does require program membership and an individual profile. So hang on, more about that in just a few minutes. So we've talked about the 3 tasks, right? If you think back to that, I'm going to go back to this. We've talked about planning, that's task 1. Instruction is task 2. Assessment is task 3. We've talked about academic language. I want to just talk for just a moment about the effective teaching practices. And so that's really the next component that, again, is woven throughout edTPA. And in this, candidates in task 1 are asked to justify their planning decisions. And they do this by talking about what they know about their students, their current knowledge, what they know about their student assets. But they are also justifying their planning decisions based on theory and research that is applicable to what they're teaching, to the pedagogical strategies, the content that they're teaching, that just is related to what they're teaching. In task 2, they are asked to analyze their teaching effectiveness. So now they've completed their instruction, and they're asked to analyze that effectiveness. And then in task 3, they are providing evidence of the ways that they use data to inform their next steps of instruction. So again, all of these that we've talked about right here, everything that we've talked about on this screen, it does align with the components of teaching effectiveness that California has established as well. So just a quick, the slide that you see here is just kind of a breakdown of within each task, what are candidates being asked to submit as their evidence. So again, at each task, they're being asked to provide this evidence. So each artifact is really something that teachers develop routinely as part of their teaching. Their lesson plans, assessments, their feedback to students, things like that. While video recording may not be a common artifact of teaching, it is essential for edTPA. And I've said often, it's one thing to plan and analyze your own teaching. It's something else to have to actually demonstrate that effectiveness to others. You can see in the assessment task, I added a little footnote there for us. And that's just that for the candidates' student work samples, for most handbooks, candidates will choose 3 focus students. I'll talk about the exception to that in just a moment. But when they're choosing their 3 focus learners, at least one of those students must have a specified learning need. And in California, the candidate must include 1 focus learner who is an English language learner. So I wanted to make sure I added that note here for you. So again, for most handbooks, candidates are selecting 3 focus learners. In the early childhood education handbook, candidates will select 2 focus learners. And then in the special education, we don't even talk about it. Never mind. I forgot. I'm so used to giving this to folks who are already using that handbook. So never mind. All right. So a couple quick notes just about the scoring and score reporting. But before we get to that, I do want to talk to you about kind of the structure of the rubrics and the scoring on edTPA. So all of the rubrics for edTPA, most of those handbooks have 15 rubrics. Again, you heard me say that 2 rubrics are not included in the World and Classical Languages. So those 2 handbooks have 13 rubrics. And the rubrics or the handbooks that are used by the multiple subject elementary credential, those have 18 rubrics. So they have the same first 15, and then the 3 additional ones are for that 4th task. But all of the rubrics, whether there's 13, 15, or 18, all of them are on the same 5-point scale. And that 5-point scale really does show this progression of readiness to teach. So you can see at that level 1 that this is a candidate who is demonstrating performance that indicates that they may not yet be ready to teach, at least as measured on that particular construct. So what does this candidate look like? They are very teacher focused. Their planning, their instruction, their assessment is really designed with the whole class in mind. And it may be fragmented or indiscriminate. It's not flowing well. All the way up to that level 5, which is really providing evidence of a highly accomplished beginning teacher. This is a candidate who is very student focused, whose planning, instruction, and assessment is focused more on individuals or flexible groups of students, and whose plans and their instruction is intentional, it's well executed, it flows very well. So again, on a scale of 1 to 5, this is what the rubrics kind of look like. They, of course, have much more detail than what you see here. But for edTPA, proficiency sits at level 3. So that's the level that represents the knowledge and skills of a candidate who is qualified to teach. So again, on the scale of 1 to 5, proficiency sits at level 3 for edTPA. So we'll just talk a little bit about scoring and score reports, and then we'll talk about joining the edTPA community after that. So in terms of who scores edTPA, we work very hard to make sure that there is a 50-50 breakdown between primary program faculty and P12 educators. So that's sort of the breakdown is 50% EPP faculty, and then the other 50% are P12 educators. Either of those groups need to have several things in order to be able to be qualified to score edTPA. So the first is that they're subject matter experts. They have to have had experience mentoring or supervising novice teachers, and had to have taught in that subject or grade span within the past 5 years. They also need to hold, and this is for California, need to hold a state agency license or credential to teach English language learners, or have experience with English language learners in the past 10 years. And again, that's because of that requirement for candidates to include an English language learner in one of their focus students. So anybody who is scoring a California candidate portfolio will also have that additional experience. They need to have taught methods or supervised student teachers in the field, or be an administrator in a teacher preparation program. Again, you will have access to the slide deck, but if you do want more information on becoming an edTPA scorer, I have the link right here in the slide deck for you. So certainly welcome you to check that out. And if you're interested, absolutely invite you to apply. So there's an application process. The applications are gathered, and then in about October of each year, that's when the hiring takes place. So we've missed the window for this upcoming spring, but certainly encourage you to apply. Your application will be put on file, and you'll be contacted at about the beginning of the next academic year. And then the training for that takes place in February. So there's a training each February, and then those scorers are ready to score beginning in the spring. So certainly invite you to check that out if you're interested. It is just to kind of give you a sense, you do get paid for the training. I believe it's about 22 to 25 hours of asynchronous online training, so you complete modules, and then you do have a synchronous component as well at the very end. And then there is, of course, you do get paid, of course, for scoring portfolios. Just in terms of our scoring model, it is a single scorer model. So one scorer will evaluate the entire portfolio. So they'll evaluate all 15 rubrics the candidate is submitting evidence for. Again, those rubrics are scored on that 5-point scale, and rater agreement is evaluated by both exact and adjacent agreement. Under our scoring model, about 30% of portfolios are double scored. 10% of those are just randomly selected for reliability. So 10% are going to be just randomly generated and selected. We use that for reliability purposes. But then any portfolio where it scores within the double scoring band around the state's passing standard. So this is within a few points below and above the state passing score. Those portfolios automatically get a second read. So if you have a candidate who has scored just maybe instead of a 41, they've scored a 40 or a 39, know that that portfolio has already had two sets of eyes, two reviewers have taken a look at that portfolio. The other thing about edTPA is that we have a rolling submission windows. A lot of times programs or candidates will ask, when do I have to submit by? When's the due date? We don't establish the due dates. Programs and candidates can select their own due date. And so this is the list of submission and reporting dates. And so I've kind of highlighted the one that we're working toward right now. And that is that if you look at this from left to right, that to receive scores on January 7th, 2021, a candidate would submit their portfolio by December 17th of this year. So it's a 3-week window for scores, and they those 3-week the submissions are about every 2 weeks, and so then scores come back 3 weeks later. So again, if I wanted scores back on January 7th, I would make sure that my portfolio was submitted by December 17th. All right, Kendall, I'm going to stop and just ask if there was anything in the chat that we should address yet.
No.
Okay.
You're fine.
Excellent. All right, so I want to just share with you all how to join the edTPA community. I had said earlier that that's one of the things that you need to do in order to gain access to the materials. And so if you go to edtpa.aacte.org and you click right here, I'm kind of using this blue arrow to point to this, it says Join edTPA. If you click that, it'll take you to a screen that says Join edTPA. It kind of shows you how. There are a couple different levels of membership. There's the Educator Preparation Program. There's also an associate membership. I'm going to be honest with you, and if you've been on some California coordinator calls with me, you know I've said Educator Preparation Program, everybody just join at that level. We are actually, and we've said that because initially we thought you needed to join at that level in order to get scores. We're actually working on a few internal processes. So right now, if you are a district-based induction program and you want to join edTPA community, you haven't done that and you need to, go ahead and join at the associate membership level. If you've already filled this out for the EdPrep program, that's fine. Don't worry about it. If you picked the wrong one, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We will sort all this out after the dust settles. We just want to get you access to the materials. So go ahead and select the associate membership. But again, if you select the incorrect one, it's okay if you do that. If you do select the Educator Preparation Program, that application, it's going to ask you for things like your dean, your edTPA coordinator, your signator. So the dean can just be whoever oversees the induction work for your district or your program. The signator is the name of the person who can sign into enter into a non-disclosure agreement. And then your edTPA coordinator would be the person who is the primary point of contact. And I'm going to talk more about what that person will receive in just a moment.
Excuse me for interrupting me. I know Roxanne needs to leave soon, and I have a question actually for her.
Okay.
In terms of, will the induction programs receive the scores? Have they been added to the list from which the candidate selects?
You know, that's a really good question, Kendall. As it's new for us this last year, I think the best place to ask that question to make sure you get the accurate response would be in the next session. There's an induction Q&A. Karen Sacramento will be on that, and as you know, she's the queen of induction, so that's probably the best chance you have for the most accurate response.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think right now there's still a little bit up in the air about this. So we very gracious. We appreciate your patience as we sort through just how we will get scores to induction programs, how programs, what they'll need, and how they'll need it. So we, again, thank you for your grace and your patience, understanding. But once your program has completed the application, again, that associate membership application will be easier for you to complete. But once you complete that and you have received your notification from AACTE that you have joined the community, then you'll be able to go and create a profile. And that's your personal access. So then you might want to give the other people within your induction program the ability to create their own personal profile. And they can do that. So the mentors who are working with candidates, maybe other folks who are in your district, they may need that access as well. And they can certainly create a profile themselves. So absolutely possible to give membership more broadly. I put this in here. I've already talked about this, but I put it in here just so that you'll have it afterwards, understanding kind of the different levels. So I'll leave that in this deck so that you have it when I share this with everyone. The role of the coordinator or the contact person, really your primary purpose is to serve as a point of contact for receiving and sharing information, communications, trainings, things like that. We offer a number of resources for programs, trainings, online trainings right now. We offer just a tremendous amount of resources and communications that I will share with the California community, updates. We have our monthly edTPA coordinator calls, certainly being invited to those. So really the edTPA coordinator is really that person who is the point of contact. They are probably also the person who will ensure that everyone has access to the resources so that other mentors have access to that AACTE site that we just talked about. They will likely also serve as the score reporting recipient, but again, kind of just holding off on that until we have a little bit more details. And then just a few other pieces of information just to kind of get you started as well in terms of locating some key resources and supports. So there are two websites that edTPA has, right? So the first one is edTPA.com. This is most often thought of as the candidate-facing web page, and it primarily is. But I wanted to point out one place on here that I want you to know about. It's a great place for you to go and look for resources, and that's under the faculty tab. I know it's very EPP-driven language, but the faculty tab really should probably read programs, right? It's really meant for programs. And you can see I've had this arrow here pointing to this kind of grayish, bluish box. And you can see there's 4 hyperlinks. Right now, those 4 hyperlinks will take you to information and registration for webinars that we are hosting and facilitating for programs. Again, not for candidates, but specifically for programs. So if you have mentors who need to learn a little bit more about edTPA, we certainly invite you and encourage you to share this information with them. And we look forward to connecting with them on one of our upcoming webinars. The other side of edTPA.com is really all of the candidate resources. This is just a snapshot of the candidate page. So right there in the center, you see the word candidates. If you click on that, you'll see this list of different links. If I had to give you any advice about where to start here, it would be under Getting Started. If you look at the Getting Started page, you'll find all kinds of resources as well. They are, again, designed for candidates, but honestly, if you are new to edTPA, they're not a bad place to start for you as well. And then again, we've talked about this a few times, but really the other website, so that edTPA.com that I just talked about, that's really primarily the candidate website. edTPA.aacte.org is for programs only. So this is not a site where we give candidates access to. So you wouldn't want to share this with your candidates. But this is really for faculty, for staff, for mentors, for all of the folks who are working with candidates and helping to prepare them. This is really their place to go for all of their official resources. And some of the resources that you can find here, we have resources for mentors and P12 administrators. These are fantastic resources. They're available right on the homepage. You don't even have to have an account to access these. They're publicly available. Some of the resources that I definitely love to point out, these are behind the firewall, so these do require membership and a profile. There's, of course, the handbook. That's going to be really all of the instructions, all of the directions, all of the requirements and considerations for completing edTPA. There's Making Good Choices, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's really tips and strategies to help candidates be successful as they're navigating edTPA. Also in that resource library are the Understanding Rubric Level Progressions. I'll come back to those in just a minute, and the academic language handouts that I talked about earlier. The Understanding Rubric Level Progressions, we call these the URLP for short, so URLP. These are, very honestly, these are my favorite resource. The URLPs break down the scoring into even further than the rubrics do. And so this is really going to provide kind of the differentiation or the distinction between a level 3 proficient performance and below proficiency and above proficiency. But then within that, it also details and differentiates the performance between a 1 and a 2, and a 2 and a 3, and 3 and a 4, and so on. So the Understanding Rubric Level Progressions are another fantastic resource for candidates as well. The final thing that I'll share with you on the edtpa.aacte site is the National Online Community. So if you get access to edtpa.aacte.org, I encourage you to make use of the National Online Community. This is a discussion board where users like yourselves, programs, mentors, anybody who's supporting candidates can post a question. Other members of the community can answer that question, but Stanford does monitor this. So Scale is active in monitoring this and will also answer their questions as well. So this is a great place to go. If you have a question, you need an answer, you can do a quick search here and see if anybody else has answered your question or asked your question, and if it's been answered. The other thing that we have is, by way of sharing information, is we have every other month, we release a community newsletter. Actually went out today, so if some of you have joined edTPA, you should have received that today. And this is just updates, announcements, notes from the field that we need to share with you. So the newsletter is another fantastic way to keep in touch. And then finally, I just want to provide you with this. Again, I have that link so that you know how to get to all those secure resources for programs right up there. But I've also given you my direct email. So feel free. I am the evaluation systems team member who's dedicated to California. So happy to be connecting with you and working with you. I'm happy to, talk offline, answer any questions you have. I know it can be a lot to navigate initially, so I'm certainly happy to help you do that. We also have a team email, so I've shared that with you here as well. There are 4 of us who monitor that email. So if you need an answer very, very quickly, you can, of course, email me, but you may get a slightly quicker answer just if someone else is in that email, that support email. They can certainly help you as well. So I'm going to pause, or I'm going to stop, and I'm going to ask Kendall, is there anything in the chat that we can answer?
Do you want to talk about if candidates aren't proficient, what kind of feedback they get to improve?
Yeah, I can do that. So when candidates get their score report back, they are going to receive a numerical score for each rubric, and then also some kind of a comment about their performance on that. So why did they score the score of 3? Why did they score the score of 2? And so that's going to be some feedback that they receive. Programs can also review with a candidate the materials that they've already submitted. So if a program has, if a candidate has submitted their materials, they have not met the standard, your program, you can sit down with that candidate and look through their materials using the handbook and the rubrics and the URLPs to begin to understand where candidates have struggled. The other thing I will do before I add this slide deck to the resources for today, I will add a slide in here. We are also offering webinars for teacher candidates. And one of those is a retake webinar. So you know what, I will create another slide in here and I will add the webinar links directly in here so that you have them. Anything else, Kendall?
No, that's it. Oh, wait, no. One more question. How long does the edTPA process take? Would it make sense to work on task 1 this year and the other 2 next year, or better to wait till next year if they haven't started yet?
Great. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Kirsten. So edTPA, that learning, the 3 tasks are all about one learning segment. And a learning segment is defined as 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. So really, once they start, they're going to finish the whole thing. So they shouldn't start this year and then plan on finishing it next year. It's going to be completed within 3. It's the learning segment, their edTPA is about, it's written about 3 to 5 consecutive lessons. So, you know, they do have, because of the executive order, they do have a number of years to complete this. So if they want to or need to get that finished this year, they certainly can. Otherwise, they do have that flexibility.
And I just want to add that probably the sooner the better, because candidates who come back after several years' absence find that they've forgotten a lot of what they learned in their coursework and their mentoring support. And so it makes sense to do this, if at all, unless, you know, there's some intervening reason really that they need to delay. It's really important to get right on top of it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. I don't see any other questions. Kendall, did you see any? Did we miss any?
No.
Okay.
I believe that's everything. Oh, wait, there's one new one.
Yep.
By
consecutive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do the 3 to 5 lessons have to be back to back or more like part of the same unit? Thank you, Lisa. So both, neither. So what consecutive means is that same content, it's the content that is following the lessons that are following each other in a sequence. So it wouldn't be within a unit, day 1, day 7, day 10. It might be days 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, but that might look different, right? That might be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. It might be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But it might be, especially now, teaching in a virtual environment, it might be Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday. So however that looks, however they're teaching the next lesson. So it's just 3 to 5 consecutive lessons that are building on each other and toward a common outcome.
Yeah, and the common outcome, if there's anything like, English teachers, in high school English teachers used to often have a vocabulary building lesson once a week to, you know, strengthen students' vocabulary for the SATs. So if they do that, it has nothing to do with the rest of it. They don't include that.
Right.
You know, so it all needs to be around whatever the central focus for the sequence of lessons is, and anything that is an addition, you just leave out.
Yeah, so Lisa says, thank you for that. So then typically it sounds like they teach, reflect, and apply, and they can expect to do most of the narrative writing and evidence submission after completing the sequence. Is that right? Yeah, so really the best way to do this is if they do their planning and then they write their planning commentary. I tell them, like, wrap it up, put it to bed, right? Do all the planning tasks first and really get that out of the way. Then they teach. And then, and while they're teaching, they're doing their assessing as part of those lessons, right? So the assessing is right in, it's occurring at the same time as the instruction. And then they can do their reflections and their analyses after that learning segment is over. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think we've actually reached our time. I believe, oh, we might even be a few minutes over. So I certainly want to give all of you time to get to your next session. Thank you so much for joining us today. And absolutely, please contact me if you have any questions. Happy to set up a time to talk and to share other resources with you. So everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.